WBC belt that has included Ali, the greatest of all time. They are set and ready to answer who's the greatest of right now. Wilder, Fury 2, here we go.
Okay, we'll start with this. Well, I'm sure that most of you have heard the big news by now. Earlier today, it was confirmed that Chantel Cameron is getting her world title opportunity, and she is going to be locking horns with Brazil's own bronze medalist, Adriana Araujo. Now, this is a fight that we've already talked about. We've already discussed what Chantel is going to be facing in this fighter. This is no easy task. This is no gimme fight. This is a genuinely dangerous opponent for Chantel to have to lock horns with. And for those interested as to why that is, what makes Adriana a threat, a genuine threat, to Chantel's world title aspirations and her unbeaten record, I will leave the link to that video in the description box. This wasn't the only big announcement by way of Matchroom earlier today. It was also announced that Chantel Cameron's good friend, Savannah Marshall, would be challenging for a world title herself, but not the world title that we previously talked about, not at the weight that was previously reported. It appears that Savannah Marshall is going to be challenging for the WBO middleweight title against none other than Hannah Rankin. On Saturday, October the 17th, Savannah Marshall means to become a world champion herself in the same weight class where her amateur rival, Claressa Shields, unified all the belts. This is a bit of a change in plans. Initially, they were going to have Savannah go up there to 175 and challenge New Zealand's own Giovanna Perez for her light heavyweight version of the WBO crown. And I can think of a few reasons why the people over there at MTK and Matchroom might have had a change of heart, might have had a change in plans. You see, Giovanna's down there in New Zealand, and with the global pandemic, the travel restrictions, we don't know when that fight is going to be feasible. There's that to consider, and there's also the state of the weight class to consider, that Savannah can go up there, fight for that title, and win it. But then what? 175 is a ghost town. It's a bigger ghost town than 168. 168 is starting to fill up with talented fighters. There are 2 unified champions there currently. And you can expect that as more amateur boxers come out of the Olympics and subsequently turn pro, divisions that were a bit thin, like 168, will be more densely populated in the future. Better still, here today, a division like 175, the women's light heavyweight division, there really aren't a lot of girls up there to fight. So if Savannah did go up there, fought Giovanna, beat her, and held that WBO title, she'd have to vacate it anyway to pursue other opponents in other divisions. I understood the rhyme and the reason in having Savannah go up there, but I also understand the rhyme and the reason for the change in plans, that the best fights for Savannah really are at 168 and 160, namely this Hannah Rankin fight. I wasn't expecting to see this fight this soon, but I was expecting to see it at some point. This fight is for Claressa Shields' old WBO middleweight title. Her old WBC title is going to be on the line in Namis versus Kozin, set to go down this fall. By the time Claressa Shields returns to the middleweight division, the landscape will be very different. We could see Savannah Marshall, a fighter like Savannah Marshall, become not just a champion, but a unified champion. I give a lot of credit to Hannah Rankin for taking on this fight because she's already been in there with some tough fighters. She's been in there with Claressa Shields, who we just mentioned, but also Alicia Napoleon, Patricia Bergoult. There's a lot to admire in a fighter like Hannah Rankin because she doesn't come from some extensive amateur background like a Claressa Shields or a Katie Taylor, yet she takes these fights on anyway, and she doesn't even have to. She's a bassoonist, for Christ's sake.
You ain't gotta be fighting people.
She is not fighting for money, per se. This is simply one of her passions. It's a labor of love. that exhibits a lot of character on the part of Hannah Rankin, though in truth, I don't give her very good odds to win this fight at all. Savannah Marshall is one of the most talented and one of the most dangerous fighters, anywhere from 160 to 168 pounds. You're talking about a fighter with a lot of size, a lot of length, good feet under her, good strong punches, and she's ambidextrous, can fight as a southpaw or an orthodox fighter. There are very few fighters at those weights that exhibit the ceiling of a Savannah Marshall, and when this fight goes down, I have no doubts that Savannah's going to win that WBO title.
This is just the beginning.
This opens the door for Savannah Marshall, should she win that WBO title, and I think she will. This opens the door for a unification match between Savannah and the winner of Namis versus Kozin, regardless of who it is. The other two world titles
Remaining.
the IBF and the WBA. In all likelihood, those two world titles are set to go vacant very near future, just like these two did. Someone else is going to pick them up, and Savannah will have the opportunity to challenge that fighter as well. The landscape could dramatically change in the near future at 160 pounds.
Don't be surprised if Christina Hammer picks up the other two.
Thereby opening the door for a potential Marshall versus Hammer unification match. And that's the kind of match that opens yet another door to a separate conversation, the Marshall versus Shields conversation, if they both have Christina Hammer as a common opponent. That'll allow the fans to cross-compare performances to see who did it better, thereby building the fight with Savannah and Clarissa. This change of plans from Savannah Marshall, MTK, the people over there at Matchroom, is set to bring a lot more attention to the middleweight division than it's been getting since Clarissa Shields descended to junior middleweight. I expect things to heat up fairly quickly at 160 pounds. For now, keep your eyes peeled for Marshall versus Rankin on Saturday, October 17th, this fall. Moving on. We talked about in my previous video how Sean Porter has said that Al Heyman told him he will fight the Errol Spence versus Danny Garcia winner. And we talked about that from the Sean Porter angle, but not the Errol Spence Jr. Danny Garcia angle, that essentially the winner of the fight should expect to have a rematch with Sean Porter as opposed to a unification match with Terrence Crawford. At this point, I'm not looking for the fight to be made, per se. I can see that this is more of the same from the kids on the PBC side of the street. I mean, this reminds me of what took place in March of 2019, after Errol Spence had defeated the unbeaten lightweight Mikey Garcia. Post-fight, his focus and the conversation immediately turned to pursuing either a Manny Pacquiao fight, which was never very likely, or a Sean Porter fight, but not a Terrence Crawford fight, not the fight at the weight that the people are actually asking you for, anything but that fight. And the same appears to be true here in 2020. That should Errol Spence beat Danny Garcia in whatever fashion, what we might see him doing thereafter is having a rematch with Sean instead of a unification match with Terrence. And that is in spite of all this recent talk from Errol Spence about how he trades barbs with Terrence Crawford via FaceTime and how the fight will happen. I mean, you'll notice that these kinds of reassurances always happen when the guy's got a fight booked.
He's talking about Crawford when he's fighting somebody else.
The look of it is that these guys are quite shamelessly trying to age Terrence Crawford out. Terrence Crawford, who's not far off from his mid-30s. I guess that what they hope to do is allow Father Time to ravage him, catch up with him a little more before any one of them decides to lock horns with him, because I'm convinced that all this recent talk of Terrence Crawford from Sean Porter, all this recent talk from Keith Thurman, this recent talk from Errol Spence is little more than hot air. Those guys are just blowing smoke. Perhaps they now know that ignoring Terrence Crawford and disavowing his WBO title does little more than ruffle the fight fans' feathers. So now what they've opted to do is pretend that they want that fight by making all these public statements to the pundits, to the boxing community at large, the media.
Yeah.
They know they can't get away with ignoring him, but at the same time, they still don't want to fight him. Not really. They're happy playing musical chairs with each other, safely behind the borders, behind the shores of PBC Island. And it is a rather sad display that no division, more than the welterweight division, is dominated by American fighters. There really is a strong American presence felt in the 147-pound division, and yet this is what we as American fight fans have to deal with. A series of alternatives and substitutes, some better than others, but better still, just alternatives and substitutes to what it is we've been asking for. And what we've been asking for is a Terrence Crawford fight. Not for Terrence Crawford to have to jump through hoops and run through a gauntlet to, quote-unquote, earn an Errol Spence fight. Terrence Crawford is a world champion the same way that Errol Spence is a world champion, the same way that Sean Porter was a world champion when Errol Spence decided to fight him. So why doesn't he decide to fight Terrence Crawford? Because the look of this is that if Errol beats Danny, they're going to get him booked up right away to keep him away from Terrence Crawford. Same way they did after the Mikey Garcia fight.
They want to age him out.
And you wonder why boxing isn't at the forefront of the American sporting world like it used to be. You wonder why boxing has moved to the background of American sports. And stuff like this is why. I mean, I understand protecting your assets, I do, but in this business, that's kind of a redundancy when what you're selling here is the question mark. What you're selling here is the sizzle. What happens if you put Errol Spence Jr. in the ring with Terrence Crawford at the same time? Who emerges the victor? It seems like the people at the PBC rather not find out the answer to that question. Instead, they will keep Errol Spence safely behind their borders, fighting anyone and everyone but Terrence Crawford, because we're already seeing the first signs that after this Danny Garcia fight, if Errol wins, he ain't gonna fight Crawford after that either. And listen, I never expected Terrence Crawford to be Errol Spence's first fight after the car accident. Far from it. I myself agree with Terrence Crawford's contention that that shouldn't be his next fight, not the first fight since the car accident. Have your tune-up fight with Danny Garcia, because that's what the fuck that is. That's a glorified tune-up fight. But have your tune-up fight with that guy, because you need it. It's after that that you should be looking to unify, because time waits for no man. And it seems like people over there at the PBC and their supporters, that faction of fans, it seems that they're happy letting Crawford versus Spence go where Brook versus Khan went. And that's nowhere, folks. That's nowhere.
This is the right hand that changed the world.
This is the right hand that shook the world. Right there, baby.
I want to get right up close to the pillow fist.
Yeah. Just check there's nothing in them gloves, will you?
See? I don't feel nothing. But the autopsy has said that there was a metal object in the gloves. That's what I heard.
So you can see and hear here, both Sugar Hill Stewart and Tyson Fury are mocking the makeshift conspiracy theory cooked up by YouTubers to try to help Deontay Wilder save face after his crushing defeat to Tyson Fury, i.e. Glove Gate. Oh, Deontay Wilder's fans have been very vocal about this conspiracy, making all kinds of assertions and anecdotes in reference to it, though Deontay Wilder himself hasn't actually addressed that subject. And one would think that if Tyson Fury walked into the ring with a foreign object and struck you with it, you'd have the most to say about it. You, your manager, your legal team, but no, nothing yet.
Nada.
About 5 or 6 months after that fight, we still don't hear or see much from Deontay Wilder in reference to this conspiracy theory. We're hearing everything from everyone except Deontay Wilder, an assertion I've made in several videos and I'm making right now.
What the hell else can you do but laugh at this shit?
The conspiracy theory, its premise, and those propagating it are a joke. A fucking joke. I mean, how many times are they going to have Nicholas Asbury come on and make all those same allegations about what allegedly happened in sparring?
Unproven allegations, by the way.
As if any of that has anything at all to do with what took place in the second Tyson Fury versus Deontay Wilder title fight. Because these guys, they're still making videos about this stuff. This is pretty much the last gasp of the Deontay Wilder fan ahead of what is the third installment. The third installment, which could see Deontay Wilder suffering yet another crushing defeat, which could result in his subsequent retirement. If he loses to Tyson Fury in that third fight, I really don't imagine he's going to stick around after that. And these are would-be investigative journalists can't actually be bothered to reconcile how it is that JD's was in the presence of Tyson Fury and his team in his locker room as his hands were being wrapped in front of the sanctioning body, the alphabet organization involved, the WBC, and the commission These guys can't be bothered to reconcile how it is that Tyson Fury would have pulled all this off with all these prying eyes present. Their idea of, I don't know, explaining this and reconciling it is that what? They were all in on it?
Really?
I'll take you back to my previous assertion that if you could get that many people on board with this nefarious plot, wouldn't it be a lot more simple to simply send a brown paper bag to one or two of the judges to fiddle with the scorecards? I mean, if you can get that many eyes, that many ears involved in this nefarious scheme, those are that many more people you have to worry about rolling over on you, blackmailing you. Essentially, what this conspiracy theory denotes is probably the most impractical method of fixing a fight in modern boxing, which for Tyson Fury would have been unnecessary anyway, as he already took two of Wilder's best shots and still heard the final bell. So, hypothetically speaking, if you wanted to ensure the victory ahead of a second fight, it'd be a lot easier to pay the judges than to stuff a cartoon anvil inside of your glove, walk into the ring with it.
Just check there's nothing in them gloves, will you?
See, I don't feel nothing. But the autopsy has said that there was a metal object in the glove. That's what I heard.
I mean, what else can you do but laugh at the whole goddamn thing? You let these guys tell it, and they cracked the case. But what did cracking the case actually accomplish? It didn't get Deontay Wilder his belt back. Tyson Fury's still the WBC champion. It didn't reverse the loss on Wilder's record. It certainly hasn't stopped the third fight from taking place. That's underway. So, if these guys did crack the case and solve the mystery, what did that accomplish? Not a heck of a lot, from where I'm sitting. If anything, it's been counterproductive towards their goals. These guys are in love, absolutely enamored with Deontay Wilder. But all they've done by propagating this propaganda, this conspiracy theory, is made him the social pariah, the butt of every joke in the heavyweight division, from his costume being too heavy to his torn bicep that maybe was or wasn't torn. Depends on who you ask. If you ask Junior Fa, he was injured, though if you ask Shelley Finkel, he wasn't. If you ask Wilder himself, he was a zombie before Tyson Fury even threw the first punch. Though he never actually elaborated as to why that was. 5 or 6 months out from that fight, we still don't know what the hell Wilder was talking about. The most I can say in reference to this footage of Sugar Hill Stewart and Tyson Fury openly mocking the Glovegate conspiracy theory is, well, that's essentially what jokes are supposed to do. Jokes. They're supposed to make you laugh, and that theory, that's a joke.